Hello and welcome to TopShelf Books. If you're joining us for the first time, hopefully we're going to be adding some new titles to your TBR. And you can always visit me at Books and Piles on Tumblr if you're wondering what's in my TBR. Today we're going to be talking about ElfQuest, which began as a comic book series and has since expanded into graphic novels, into short stories, into an entire fantasy empire. So if you haven't had the experience, I'm so excited to introduce you to these wonderful characters who were created, illustrated, and written by Wendy and Richard Pini. Because I'm using art from the series as I talk through, I will warn you, this is more of a visual bookcast than our usual ones because you can't miss out on Wendy's art. Although I do also want to say I'm not intending any copyright infringement with any of the art. You can see most of the series online for free at elfquest.com, but I'm just using the pictures to talk about them, so no infringement of her lovely art is intended here. So ElfQuest is incredibly special to me, and I'll be talking with you shortly about how it came into my life. It's been with me since I was about 8 years old, so we have a long time together. And because it's so special, it gets to sort of break the rules. First, in the sense, as I've already mentioned, that this is going to be more of a visual experience than usual, but second, that I'm giving you a piece of recommended reading, not just something to maybe potentially add to your TBR. I always give you those, but there's an article on the ElfQuest website called The Weird of Wendy Pini, and it does a beautiful job of discussing her art and her ethos and the challenges that she faced and the criticism she faced as an artist. Was really surprising to me because I think that she really is wonderful, not only as a creator who has made beautiful things, but as a person and as someone that cares about nature and cares about representation and is so welcoming. So I was really surprised to read about the backlash that she received. And I almost included an image here from a recent publication about Wendy called The Line of Beauty. There is an image in the back of the book of three of the main characters from ElfQuest, Cutter, Lita, and Skywise. And the image is, to me, so perfect for ElfQuest because it's an erotic image. All the characters sort of merge and blend into one another, but it's also incredibly chaste. And I think that that's such a Wendy thing that she can elevate even erotic art to um, such a place of beauty that it loses kind of the stigma, if that makes any sense, that some erotic art has. And it's also incredibly domestic because this is a family of characters in the truest sense, but it also pushes against some boundaries because you do have two male characters and a female character, and that would have been, transgressive, probably to some people still is transgressive. And that I think also encompasses some of her style. So I don't know how good of a lead in that is to make you want to check out some ElfQuest, but maybe taking a look at the article will give you more appreciation than I can give you. So to give you just a little bit of background, ElfQuest actually dates back to 1978, and the creators are a husband and wife team, Wendy and Richard Pini. Wendy does the illustrations, Richard does a lot of the words, and also I think a lot of the marketing, the PR sort of things. And they published ElfQuest under their own label, Warp Graphics, and then it moved. At one point, Marvel was publishing the comic books, and then most recently, Dark Horse. And you can read everything prior to 2014 online for free. The website is very easy to navigate. The illustrations are very, very beautiful as they come up on the screen, which, if you've had any experience navigating other comics online, you know that that can be a rarity. So just to give you a little bit of background information on the series itself. I don't usually try to convince you to read something by marshaling praise from outside sources. I usually just point you to things and let you make up your own mind. But as I said, ElfQuest really is special, and I think you deserve to hear some of the ways that it's different. And I've been part of the fandom for a long time, so I was fortunate enough to be there to see some of these things. But others, I had to do a little research. One thing that ElfQuest has done differently, well, let me start by asking you to imagine the stereotypical person that purchases and reads comics. And I bet that you get a particular image, and I bet it's a particular gender, and all those sorts of things. And when I teach graphic novels to my students, this is one of the first things we usually talk about is, who reads comic books? And they're always surprised that it's not as limited as they think it is. But one thing that ElfQuest did is it went into a market where there was some of that stereotype, especially when you think about superhero comics, right? And they developed an audience that included women and the LGBTQ plus community and people of color. And I have years ago, this has changed, thankfully recently, but years ago when I was younger, I have been the only woman in a comic shop. It's an experience. It's an interesting sort of, it's like, are you here looking for a gift for someone? What are you doing? You're crossing into sacred territory. And I did live in a fairly homogenous area, so I never got to see anyone of color in a comic shop when I was younger. I have since, gone into a wider world, but ElfQuest is unique in that it reached a broader audience, and I think that's really something for it to be proud of. It's been described by the American Library Association as one of the most important works in American fantasy. Can't do better than that, right? Um, it's been described as a saga, as something that has inspired storytelling. It's been praised for creating strong female characters that helped get women into comics. I don't know if you know this, but women are now the main audience for comics. Good job, gals. Also, it was targeted as obscene material in the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund's first case. And finally, I don't know what you think about BuzzFeed, but they ranked it as the most life-changing graphic novel of all time. And again, I don't usually try to use other people's words to draw you in, but there's something really cool about people being able to look at this series and say, I am changed for reading this. So I'm really excited, if you haven't read ElfQuest, to be the person that maybe convinces you to pick up an issue. Okay, I try to avoid ridiculously sentimental personal stories when I talk to you, but every once in a while, I told you this was going to be kind of a different episode. So, when I was 8 years old, um, I was staying with my cousin at her grandparents', and I was fortunate enough to grow up with my cousins as my friends, and all the family sort of, we shared all the grandparents, whether they were yours or not. They would still, bring you treats, and you stay over at people's houses and things. And it was really a wonderful upbringing in that sense. But I was staying with my cousin, and one of her uncles lived there, Uncle Jim. And I have to give kudos to Uncle Jim because he would work all day and come home. Well, he worked all night actually. He worked midnight shift, and he would come home to these noisy, boisterous girls that were excited to see him, and we would force him to do things like have tea parties with a gravy boat serving as the teapot, and he would, you know, forego getting a shower and having breakfast and all those nice things to be like, okay, I'm having cookies, I'm having tea, which was probably Pepsi or something. But he knew that I was a reader and that I loved fantasy books. And my uncle, his brother, had been giving me fantasy books for a long time and driving one of my aunts crazy because she thought the content was just too racy. But fortunately, I was young enough that it didn't have a whole lot of effect. And if you're wondering about the racy content, I read a lot of Conan the Barbarian. There's some interesting raciness in those. But it didn't affect me because I was too young to get it. I always think you should let kids read a little bit above where they are. anything that you're worried about will probably just pass them by anyway. But anyway, Uncle Jim gave me this particular battered copy of ElfQuest. I still have it. He let me keep it because I just fell so in love that it really did change my life. It was all I wanted to know about and to be part of, and I just thought it was so special when he let me keep that book. And a couple of years ago, he passed away. He took his own life, actually. Um, and I will never forget that moment of kindness that he extended to me, and he will always be part of that book. And I mean, getting me into the series, but also when I physically look at that marker and have it in my life, he gets to live on and be part of that. And I don't think he would mind that particular legacy. So, a dear friend of mine actually asked me if I would talk a little bit about ElfQuest, and she gave me a couple ideas of different routes I could go in terms of talking about the series. Um, and I really struggled to know where to start. There's so much ElfQuest. There are so many volumes, and I'll talk a little bit later about um, just how many. So I decided to organize this by talking about the things that have to do with ElfQuest that I think are just really, really cool. And I'm going to begin with acceptance, and I've included here for you two panels from two of the graphic novels. And the first, with sort of the hazy, shimmery edges, is Cutter with his family, and they are all kind of hibernating, sleeping through the winter. And he projects mentally this image to another elf in the series to show this is what peace is like, this is what home is like. This series really does privilege family and also acceptance of whatever that family might look like, right? Age, skin color, gender, none of these things are sort of important. It's the bonds that we have with one another. And I think, given the shape of the world and all the terrible things that we're reading about sometimes as they are happening, um, I think we need more of that. And I'm sure there's someone somewhere that can argue about how the panel is portrayed or the somewhat nudity in the panel, but to me it will always just be a beautiful symbol of when you find your people and when you can be safe with them and relaxed with them. The other panel I have included, it's a sadder one for the main character, Cutter there with the blonde hair riding the wolf up in the corner, but it's a happy panel for the tribe that he's watching over. And again, I wanted to show you just how diverse these characters are. The group of characters in the waterfall, there's four of them that kind of form a family bond um, and live together. In the foreground, um, there's Nightfall. She has the flowers braided in her hair, and that is her life mate Redlance and their daughter Tyleet. They are a really nice sort of gender challenge. Nightfall is the kind of fierce female character, and Redlance is very nurturing and um, not stereotypically what you expect from masculinity in comic books. In the background there, you have Tree Stump is combing out Clearbrook's hair. He is, I guess, what you would consider kind of a second husband character. Her original life mate was killed, but they're an older couple, as you can see, and they still have formed this wonderful partnership, and they support and care for one another and fight beside one another. And again, just this creation of the family that is going to be best for you and where you are going to flourish. We just don't have enough fantasy, enough literature, enough anything, I think, that shows us that this is possible for us. If you just got the sense that I could have gone on and on in that last panel, I really could have. So I'm reining myself in to talk to you about background panels, and I should have found this for you in color. I'll talk to you later about how many versions of ElfQuest live in my life. But I want to draw your attention to the background panels. Again, Cutter, the main character, is in the foreground talking. In the background, his best friend, his life mate, and his children are conspiring. And one of the things that I just freaking love about ElfQuest and I can't get over, and I've read it hundreds of times, I'm not exaggerating. I used to stay up every night and read it under my covers, and my parents did not yell at me, even though they knew what was happening because they were happy that I was reading. Until they found out about some of the racier scenes later in the books, but that was long after I had grown up. Um, they were not scanning my reading very closely, and thank goodness they weren't, because I think it was important. Anyway, one of the things I love about ElfQuest is Wendy is such a talented artist that she has created dozens of characters you can fall in love with, but her art is so dense and layered and clever and cute and humorous that you have to pay attention not just to the main character that's talking in the main dialogue, you have to look into the background. And one of the fun things about ElfQuest is seeing like what do people have in their homes. Elves are not very materialistic, but they have some stuff. So what are people wearing? What are they keeping? What are they passing on to other elves? How are the different wolves in the wolf pack behaving? What are their different expressions? You can trace all these things throughout the series, and it's really a blast to do. You can't get bored. I've already talked about the notion of finding a family that supports us and finding our own version of acceptance in a world where narratives really get shoved down our throats whether we want them or not. One of the other things that's wonderful in ElfQuest, and I've included a couple of panels to show these to you, is that, I mean, ElfQuest is inherently beautiful because Wendy's art is beautiful, but there's such a range of characters that you can find yourself represented somewhere no matter what. So, skin color, gender representation, fashion sense, age, weight, it's all there. You can find some character that you can feel some sort of closeness with. So, on this page, I have given you some sun folk. These are Lita's tribe. Uh, Cutter's life mate is Lita, the elf that he crosses the desert to find. These are the characters he finds, and then we have the wave dancers, the elves that live under the ocean, the gliders. They can fly, and then these are preservers. They're little butterfly bug creatures that assist the elves and came to the world of the two moons with the elves. Spoiler alert, the elves are not quite elves, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. All right, so here are again some more characters. The old ones, elves that have sort of evolved into or devolved into. I'm not sure the proper language, but they're part of the forest. Then you have Cutter's ancestors here, the Wolf Riders, some more wild and wolf-like than others, and then the trolls who also journeyed with the elves to the world of the two moons. So just really diverse character forms. Again, all beautiful, and I just love that there are so many voices and so many characters you can get invested in. So, of all the characters, Skywise is my favorite, Cutter's best friend. So much so that the illustration I've included for you here, I paid $50, my own money, in fourth grade, birthday money or something that I had saved, paper route money, I don't know, to my art teacher to recreate this in pastels for me. And he thought I was crazy. My parents thought I was crazy. It's a running theme that will come up probably again. But I just was so drawn to Skywise as a character, and um, the cooler thing about this is I read more about ElfQuest because they've published, some articles and criticism in what's called the ElfQuest Gatherum. Richard Pini felt the same way. Wendy had originally intended for Skywise not to make it very far into the series, and Richard said, "No, no, that's my elf, and you're not going to kill him." And that just makes me really happy as a fan because he's also my elf. I don't know that Wendy or Richard Pini will agree with what I'm about to say next, but I'm not important enough to have made it into their orbit, so I feel safe proceeding. There's a famous quote about Middlemarch from Virginia Woolf in which she claims that the magnificent book, Middlemarch, with all its imperfections, is one of the few English novels for grown up people. We can quibble with Virginia if we want to about our British novels, but ElfQuest, for all that people might say that some of the illustrations are cutesy or the characters are, too fantasy laden, I really do think it is one of the few grown up works in fantasy to grapple with things that we grow into and that we go through, whether that is loss of a child or um, you know, territorial disputes. These are happening all over the world right now, right? The struggle for resources, growing old. What is our legacy going to be? What do we owe ourselves versus what do we owe our community? How do we live alongside people that may hate us? How do we change their minds? Or what do we do if we can't change their minds? There's so much philosophy and hope in ElfQuest. And again, I just think there's so little in the world that we can read and walk away from filled with hope. And ElfQuest never fails to renew that for me. And sometimes I go a long time now as an adult with in between reading it, um, but I always come back. And every time I come back after I've been away for a time, I think, ooh, why did I stay away? I need this for myself. And there are parts of the series that are devastatingly painful, that I've never gotten over. And I won't say that I don't forgive Wendy and Richard for them because they are wonderful too, but they hurt every time. But the hope is bigger than the hurt. And I just think that we need more of that and that we need that as readers. Okay, so you may remember that I mentioned a little bit ago that the elves aren't really elves. The elves are actually aliens, and they are traveling to a particular time in Earth that they think is the Middle Ages, and they're going to appear as elves so that they can kind of study the world. But things go wrong, they end up stuck there, and they shrink from what you can see in that top panel, elegant, willowy. I hesitate to say Tolkien-like because I don't think that Wendy is at all derivative of Tolkien, although yes, she was very aware of him. I would love to see her illustrate Legolas and Gimli, for my own money, for my own entertainment. Anyway, those type of elves, I don't know what to call them. They become the type in the lower panel. They evolve, and the reason I highlight this is not to show you the evolution of the elves. I want to show you the evolution of ElfQuest, and I think what's really cool is it began in 1978. The creators stay the same. They don't sell out, they don't give the series away, but they grow as people, right? They form new ideas and new philosophies and new causes that they want to champion, and the text reflects that. And maybe someone else can criticize that and say, "Oh, there's not a strong enough declaration against this or for this." But for me, as a fellow writer and a reader, I think it's really courageous to, have a creator that says, this is what I think now, and I'm putting it out there, and I'm going to stand behind it. And maybe I think something differently in 20 years. How could you help but think something differently in 20 years, right? Isn't that, that's life and that's growth. And they don't go back and apologize. They don't revise it. They don't revamp it. It remains, it remains beautiful, but it also reflects their growth and, in some ways, societal growth. And I just think that that is really cool. So I mentioned I'm not in the orbit of Wendy and Richard Pini, but if I was, they would like this particular slide. So one of the things that happens with comic books, it's been happening for a long time, but it's more pronounced now, is you get the single issue comic books that once you could buy, on the rack at the drugstore. That's how old I am. Thank you very much. Um, They then get collected into larger versions, like a graphic novel and that yellow covered book there. I have those ElfQuests, and they're in color inside. They're hardback and they're in color, and they were purchased before the internet, so my poor parents had to track them across the universe, and they've never gotten over it. You can still very easily get them to talk about, I had to call publishing companies and obscure bookstores and they laughed at me, and yes, it was a whole thing, but God bless them because they did track them down. Well, ElfQuest goes from comic book to graphic novel to collected graphic novels, the complete ElfQuest you can see there. There are also novels for some of the books, novelizations. I own them all. And you would think, as a grown person who needs to be somewhat fiscally responsible, that I would see issues of the comics come out and say, I will wait until those are collected into a graphic novel, or I will wait until that graphic novel is collected into a more complete form. Guess who's getting the complete Stargazer's Hunt for Christmas? That's me. I'm not buying it though, my husband is. So that helps. But by the time it's said and done, I tend to own ElfQuest material 4 times. It's that good that I just hand over the money again. So I don't know if that convinces you or not, but I own most of the material in several forms. I mentioned the book The Line of Beauty previously. Here it is. Totally recommend it. It was published by Flesk, and there's also The Art of Story. And I think the third one is just The Art of ElfQuest. I should have looked that up before talking to you, but Flesk publishes all three. You can find them. I am not an art critic, so I will be honest and tell you that I have borrowed this material from the interwebs to describe The Line of Beauty, and Wendy Peeney subscribes to this in her art, and you can see it in this book cover, the fall of the folds of the gown, echoing the hair on the unicorn's neck, um, echoing the tendrils in her tiara, all those things sort of reflecting one another, even the tendrils of the leaves down on the ground. So just a very um, uh, it's a very cool thing to follow once you recognize that you can kind of trace it throughout her work. So I wanted to give you a glimpse of that as well. I wish I could explain it better, but I'm not schooled in art theory. ElfQuest has also been a teaching tool for me. For several years, I've taught a graphic novel and manga class, and um, it's always super surprised me that students come into the course not having read the material. I always expect that, like, you would think students that were already fans of it would take it, but that's not been my experience. And it always makes me grateful that I had parents and step parents that would order me single issue comics because I lived in the sticks. There was no comic book store nearby. So to get ElfQuest, it had to come from, um, I believe it was Westfield Comics, who was the distributor back then. And I loved Westfield Day. I wrote it on my calendar as a little 8 and 9 and 10-year-old girl, and I was so excited. And then sometimes my issues were back ordered, and I was so devastated. So it was a big deal. So comics were part of my life from very young. I always use ElfQuest in class because there are so many characters that one of my favorite things to do is to assign the students to write a letter to a character in which they talk about what they think is interesting with that character, but also maybe give them some advice. And it's fascinating to see who they will pick. Of course, they're always sort of the easy choices of gravitating towards the main characters. Cutter, Lita, are always popular, but the students that take it more seriously, it's interesting because they will pop up and pick all sorts of characters, and ElfQuest has such a range of humans, trolls, different tribes of elves, different personalities, and it's not quite a horoscope for my students, but it does, I feel like, give me a glimpse into what they relate to and their motivations. And so I would love to hear from you if you do end up reading, who sort of stands out to you. And going back to when I talked about ElfQuest as an evolving text, there are a few books I have read throughout my life that I return to, and I fall in love with different characters as I get older because my sentiments change and my life experiences change. And Middlemarch is a great example, to go back to our friend Virginia Woolf. When I started reading that book as a young girl, of course, I was sympathetic with Dorothea because, she has those sort of youthful excitement. She's naive, she's on crusades. As I have grown up, though, I root for Fairbrother. And it's a completely different world. And ElfQuest is the same. I started out with certain characters that I couldn't understand or sympathize, or I would maybe be dismissive of. And as time has gone on, I have changed my attitudes. And I just think that's such a mark of such a cool creation, that you can come back to it and it changes and you change and you complement one another. I just want to take a brief moment here near at the end, to say that, um, in the world of creation and fandom, I do think Wendy and Richard are really cool people. They seem to be very open and accepting and happy to communicate with their fans. um, I mean, they protect their work and they have certain standards and rules that I think they adhere to, but maybe because they've done, the comic book convention circuit for so long, they really do strike you as people that you could speak to and that love the fact that you love their creation. And again, I just think that's a rare thing. I would compare it to some of the actors that have worked with something like a Star Trek. That they are excited, that you are excited about this creation. And what a cool thing. How cool to make a community where people are welcomed and, can form a home, based around something that you all love. Perhaps I have already revealed to you over the course of these podcasts that I am a very unusual individual. This slide's gonna go forward and solidify my reputation, though. There is an ElfQuest audio movie. I have heard that it is amazing. I love the voices in my head too much to have given it a chance yet. Eventually, I will get there. I watched it go into production. I read the different posts about the actors. I heard other fans react to it. I just haven't gotten to where I'm ready for it. And I think this is something that's just strangely me. When I have an actor that I really love, sometimes I will buy films that they're in and not watch them for a very long time because I'm just so excited about them that I have to live in the anticipation for a while. It just means too much. And I know that that's silly. But I don't know, maybe that gives you a glimpse into how much ElfQuest means to me. And if you're not in a space where you want to read, maybe I can convince you to go listen. Again, I've heard that it's amazing. I just haven't approached it yet. So if you've hung out with me for other episodes, you know that I usually end these by giving you a list of titles in case you want to check them out later. I'm not going to run you through all the ElfQuest titles because there are too many. What I'm going to do instead is give you some resources if you want to get into ElfQuest. There are a million arcs. You can follow these characters over so many years, and if you're like me, you'll reach the most recent stuff and your heart will be destroyed in a million wonderful ways and then renewed. But if you're just getting started on your journey, check out elfquest.com. Again, most of the material all of the material up to 2014 is free, but it's all organized for you so you can check out that original quest if you want to, and then you can decide where you want to go from there. And if you have any questions about the individual arcs or series, you can always let me know and I'll be happy to talk about them. I am happy to walk you through any of the books if you want more bookcasts on anything specific. I just wanted to get you started, and this has gotten really long. So I hope you're still here with me. I apologize. Another place, the Complete ElfQuest Volume 1, I think it's several hundred pages and it's 16 bucks. You can't do bad for that because I believe when I was buying the original hardback, color ones, they were 40 some dollars. And it was a long time ago. So it's a deal. You can also start with the novel Journey to Sorrow's End if you are not maybe as much of a comic book person. We've reached the end, and I had so much to say. So thank you if you spent some time with me. I'm always happy to spend time with you. I do plan to keep doing these bookcasts and hopefully a little more regularly. My life's a bit chaotic right now. I have several jobs, so things just got a little off the rails for a while. But hopefully, I'll be able to update a little more regularly. If you have ideas, of course, I would love to hear them, and you can reach me at navalianlibrary@gmail.com, or you can find me on Tumblr at Books and Piles. Um, I just wish you some happy reading. I hope that you give ElfQuest a chance depending on where you are in the world, if you're getting into this hideous cold season like myself, ElfQuest is a great time. Just go curl up somewhere and do some wonderful reading. So stay warm, stay safe. We'll see you next time.